know you were going to mention UNESCO, but I have until next Monday to finish writing their policy for them. So if you don't see much of me for the rest of the day, you'll know why. The title I was given to speak to is Open Access Policies in Europe. Where are we now? And although this is the worldwide picture, this is where we are at the moment. This shows about the last 10 years of open access policy development. There's too much light. Could we just have the sorry, Jeff? Oh, right. Lovely, thank you. You can see the different colours here refer to funder policies, institutional policies, and then policies at a lower level in institutions. There are some at school or department levels. The main thing is that they have been growing more slowly of late than they were, but that was to be expected, I think. Anyway, this is where we are. Now I'm going to start talking about the institutional and funder policies separately, because I think Eloy would like them unpicked a little bit. Over the last 12 months or so, we've had a number of new policies in Europe. These are the ones that have been implemented in institutions in different countries in Europe. And we've had a number of funder policies or changes in funder policies. So we've had one from Denmark, which involved the 5 national funders, one from Ireland, which involved a number of organisations coming together to make a common policy with common wording. The European Research Council updated its guidelines last year. Their new policy has a 6 months embargo. Seems to be going against the grain at the moment. Everybody's backing off on embargoes except the European Research Council, hooray. And also has an open data policy too, which is very nice. In the UK, our research councils revised their policy. I shall be saying a little bit about that later. And of course, the European Commission's policy for Horizon 2020 has been developed. And we've heard about that from Jean-François already this morning. I will probably I am going to mention it again in a minute. With respect to the institutional policies, here's the overall picture. If you are wondering what happened in 2009, it was when 24 Finnish universities at the same time announced their new mandatory policies. We've not had a kind of blip like that since, but nevertheless it was very welcome. And policies still being made, and one already announced in 2013. Also last year, or late the year before, LERU itself produced a roadmap towards open access. This is the League of European Research Universities. It's about 25 or 30 major universities in Europe, intense research programs. And the roadmap did a number of things. It laid out the background and the case for open access. It's a very nice document for those of you who want a document as guidance, alongside the UNESCO policy guidelines, which I can also recommend. It laid out the background and case for open access, described the 2 routes, green and gold, and what they're about, and explained how universities can go about achieving open access by following one or both of those routes simultaneously. And that's more or less all I'm going to say about institutions, because the topic of the moment is funder policies. And so I want to spend the rest of my 5 minutes on that. This is the picture for funder policies. There were a number of funder policies earlier, a few years ago, because a number of funders saw the purpose of having a policy and brought their policies out. There was a little rush of policies, and then since then it's calmed down a little bit. What we are seeing, as well as new policies though, are revisions to existing policies. So for example, last year, in the middle of 2012, the Wellcome Trust revised not the wording of its policy, but the way it is implementing it, in that it is strengthening its policing of the policy and is going to introduce sanctions for people who do not comply. It was worried about the level of compliance. Similarly, the NIH in the United States also worried about the level of compliance, level of compliance was about the same for both. It was about 50 to 60%, and both of those funders want it to be much higher. So both of them have announced stronger policing. I don't really like to use that word, but it does. Stronger policing and some sanctions for non-compliance. Now to the big policy in Europe, big policy position in Europe, which is from the European Commission. Now, the European Commission funds only up to about 10% of total research in Europe. The rest is funded at member state level. But the Commission's policy is very significant in setting the standard, if we can say that, for policies. And the Commission has also issued, as Jean-François told us, the recommendations to member states. The recommendations say, more or less, here's our policy, and we expect you to do something very similar, so that we have a consistent open access picture across Europe. The Horizon 2020 policy will be mandatory. It was mandatory for 20% of the current FP7 programme research. It's now going to cover 100% of research for the next 7 years. It is a green open access mandate where authors are required to deposit their work in their local repository. So this is a distributed model mandate, and the work that's been funded by the Commission will then be harvested by OpenAIRE into the OpenAIRE database, producing a shop window on European research and giving the Commission the tool with which to analyse what is coming from its funded programme. The policy will also permit payments for gold open access from the grants. In other words, the grants eligible for gold payments. And we heard that this morning from Jean-François. There is also an interesting position taken on scientific data, and this is very important. A couple of years ago, Nelly Cruz made this statement about data, which was necessarily slightly vague, but nevertheless showing her intentions. And the Horizon 2020 policy has proposed having a open data pilot. It won't have a full open data policy, but it will pilot that in the next 7 years, and then we expect after that to have a proper full open data policy for the follow-up framework programme. So after this legislation goes through, and we are hoping that it quickly goes through, because it's been churning along, has it not, Jean-François, over the last 6 months. What would be nice to have then is coordination across the Union, and we all have a part to play in making that happen. There are 27 member states, plus the more to come during that 7 years. Some of them already have their own policy. Some of them have centres of expertise, very good expertise, but it's a patchy picture, and many do not. Many of those 27 states do not have centres of expertise and don't have a policy, nor seemingly are planning one at the moment. And even amongst those that are fairly open access aware, there is still some misconception and sometimes a low level of understanding of what is necessary in policy development terms to get the right outcome. Coordination would seem to be the key. I think the Commission is very keen to see a coordinated picture across Europe. Those of us involved in advocacy will be doing our best to support that mission on the part of the Commission. So policy alignment, why is that important? Well, for a number of reasons. First of all, for researchers who are working in interdisciplinary areas, in international teams where policies may impinge upon them from different nations, different funders, it is helpful to those researchers to find that the policies more or less match. If one policy is telling them to do one thing and one something almost completely different, then it's very difficult to get them to comply. They have a legitimate complaint that people are asking them to do too many different things and they are confused. So to help researcher compliance, we need to try and make policies align as much as possible. Alignment also supports the rest of the ERA harmonisation programme, which is all to do with harmonising the research conditions and conditions for researcher mobility and so forth, where there are researchers moving about through a continent over time. They need to find the same conditions of work wherever they go, and that applies to an open access policy as much as it applies to their pension arrangements. It's a key issue in changing author practices and norms. If they understand a simple policy situation and they can expect to find that wherever they go, that will mean that they will change their practices, and the norms within the research community will change accordingly. When we're going to develop services to support open access, and we like them to be generic and apply across national borders and not just be little national services, then of course the policy conditions under which those services are going to work need to be more or less the same. And alignment in general terms across all national policies and the Horizon 2020 so far has more or less been achieved, except in one circumstance, which I shall go on to describe briefly in a minute. So these are the policies that are all in Europe. There are others outside Europe that are more or less aligned with the one that Horizon 2020 is going to have in it. So these are the ERA policies. You can see them listed there. There's a whole number of them. They are more or less the same. There are some detailed differences, but they are more or less the same. This is data. These are data which are extremely hot off the press in that they arrived in my inbox last night. I, on behalf of Spark Europe, commissioned Fred Friend to go through the funder policies in RAWMAP, and we had some discussion about RAWMAP and how we can improve that yesterday. But anyway, I asked him to look at these policies and to categorise them according to what style of policy they were. And he looked at 49 of them. There are actually a few more than that, but some of them, like our research councils, for example, in the UK, were listed as 7 different ones. So he's pulled those together because they now have a common policy. And the analysis shows this, that for policies that are simply green open access mandates, there are 36, so that's 3/4 of the total. There are policies that have a basic green open access mandate and also say, like the Horizon 2020 one, that you can exercise your right to use your grant money to pay for gold open access if you would prefer to go that way, and there are journals, gold open access journals, that you would like to publish in. And then there's the final one, which is a gold mandate, which has a green option. So that's turning the others on their head. This is our one in the United Kingdom, of course, which now says if there is a gold option offered by the journal of your choice, you must take it. And if it is not offered, then you'll have to find a green alternative. So that's quite different. And the number of funders allowing grants to pay for gold open access comes to 19 at the moment. We will be doing more detailed analysis of these later, but as I said, just arrived last night, so I stuck them in this slide just to show you this morning. A quick run through what the Finch report in the United Kingdom recommended, and the recommendations were largely taken on board by our funder, Research Councils UK. Recommended that gold open access should be the way to go for the United Kingdom. It assigned green repositories a role in preservation and in providing access to theses and the grey literature. This was a surprise to most people running open access repositories, since they have been using them to provide access to the peer-reviewed literature, primarily. The UK currently provides open access to around 40% of its outputs, which is a very good total. 35 of that 40% is green open access in our network of repositories. And the Finch report ignored that. And it also ignored the relative success of green open access. It ignored the sunk costs that have gone into developing that repository network in the UK and all the potential that that network has for providing open data, by the way. It ignored it didn't ignore, but it pushed aside the economic implications for the UK of gold open access, and it also ignored, and this is probably the most serious thing, the style of all the other policies in the world. Instead of aligning with those, the Finch report recommended something different. Our research councils then announced their policy built on the Finch recommendations. As I've said, it favours gold open access. Our research councils are going to give £100 million, British pounds, over 5 years to publishers to provide gold open access. The £100 million has come from the research budget, by the way. It's based on acquiring rights for reuse. These were the reasons that the RCUK wants to go this way. It wants to acquire the rights for reuse. So it's going to pay the publishers to allow that, and it wants to protect publishers. The Finch report said that it didn't see it thought that long embargoes were necessary to protect publishing businesses. So there's been no real attempt by either Finch or the RCUK to protect the research community from escalating publisher costs. This led a friend and colleague of mine to come up with another definition. Here's the Budapest Open Access Initiative, which says that an old tradition and a new technology have converged to make possible an unprecedented public good. Les Carr at Southampton has come up with the Westminster Open Access Initiative, which is this. An old tradition and a new technology have converged to make possible an unprecedented injection of public cash. Finally, I just want to make one point at the bottom there about big deals. This is the slide you've just seen, but I want to put that in to remind myself to say this. I am really worried that where we're going, if we have too many of these policies, is from a situation where we buy subscriptions and we're tied into this in big deals, and small publishers get a bad deal and the tax-paying public gets a bad deal, to going to an open access publishing situation where we're tied into big deals. And what I mean by that is that the big publishers will do deals with libraries or with nations to publish work open access and continue to acquire a large proportion of the dissemination budget that a country has. We have already seen this in the UK. Our Minister for Universities, alarmed by the reaction of our universities to these policy statements, suddenly gave £10 million to 30 of our most research-intensive institutions to ease them into paying for open access. So £10 million. We've already had one publisher, Answers on a Postcard, who has made an offer to our research libraries to convert, that's the term, to convert to open access the 3,000 articles it published last year that came from RCUK funded research, to convert these to open access. If the libraries take that deal and pay for the whole lot, it will only cost £700 per article to do this major conversion. If they don't pay for them all, then they can do a deal at about £1,100. So you can see where we're going with this. Deals on open access gold charges. We're going to end up with the same situation. We're just paying for a slightly different thing. Maybe that's not bad. I don't know. The Times Higher Education has this headline this morning, which is accentuating the fact that our research councils have now taken their foot off the pedal with respect to embargoes. They're going to allow longer embargoes and also not even police them for the next 5 years. So I think this is a bit of a sad situation. Let's get off the UK and talk about where we're going with future policy development and what we can all do to help it. We've seen the Commission's recommendations to Member States, which I've mentioned. Advocacy work now will focus on encouraging policy development across our member states in the European Union. It will focus on trying to get those policies aligned with each other and with the Horizon 2020 policy to make a simple, matching and consistent open access picture across the European Union. Clearly there will be some outliers, at least for the next 5 years. I think we have very huge signs now that universities are waking up to the issues and implications of open access and starting to look very carefully at what that will mean for them. And this is all to the good. We're getting some very useful support now and action from universities and from the researchers themselves. We've seen a lot of initiatives in the last year from researchers to do with making open access happen and making it happen better. And finally, my final point is this is where the future lies. It lies with our students and with the young people coming through the research system, so early career researchers. These people are getting the message. They are also the generation that has grown up with a totally different set of expectations about what the web should be doing. And we are seeing activism in the student community formalized by the Right to Research Coalition, which is based in the United States, but which is starting to set up some activities in Europe. So for those of you working in universities where you think your students will be interested in learning about this, please look out for what the Right to Research Coalition is doing, or ask me what it's doing. It's supported in the United States by Spark, and Spark Europe will be supporting the European activities of the Right to Research Coalition as much as we can. Inevitably, they're starting small, but they are starting, and so if anybody can help or is interested in learning more about this and how students can be involved, then please let me know. Thank you for listening. That wasn't 20 minutes, that wasn't too bad. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take questions.